Hi guys, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to have you guys listen to me for the next 15 minutes or so. So as Rebecca shared, I'm Pierre with Overview Property Inspection. We do inspections of houses, commercial buildings in and around Edmonton. So a couple things I want for you guys to know is to be interactive. Okay, so let's be interactive. So a couple things. We're going to be focusing on inspections of your properties, whether you're a DIY manager or if you have a professional property management company doing those services on your behalf. Okay. So I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you guys are guilty of signing that 1-year lease and then giving the keys to tenants and letting it ride and hope for the best? Well, obviously that's a sure way to achieve failure. Okay. Now, depending on the topic, we're going to be talking about, inspections, of course, but I want to focus on things you guys should look out for when you're going to do your own inspection. Okay. Now, depending on how many properties you own and whether you are self-managing will decipher how many times you should be visiting your property. Okay. Personally, we choose to do quarterly inspections. Some people do semi-annually. Some people choose annually if they have got a property manager. At the very least, as a real estate investor, I think everyone should be attending to the property at least once a year. Okay. And so I'll give you guys the key points to things to look out for while you're doing your site visits. So you guys know what's going on. Okay. So tools that you guys are going to want to bring with you while you are doing your inspection. First and foremost, number one thing is a flashlight, something with high lumens. Okay. So 1,000 lumens or greater is obviously is beneficial. You're going to be able to see everything. A couple hand tools, caulking guns, interior, exterior, potentially a ladder if you're going to go inside the attic to identify the attic space on your own. Okay. Now, another consideration you guys should have is, you guys hear me over there? Another consideration should be, okay. Another consideration should be, should you ask your residents or tenants to be present during the inspection? I think so. Why? Well, number one, it'll give you the opportunity to potentially, gossip and bond with your tenants, but more importantly, it'll give you the opportunity to learn about conditions where number one, you may not be aware of, or also it'll give you the opportunity to teach your customer or your residents on how to identify potential issues, potentially saving you thousands of dollars if they would have went undiscovered if you're only there annually. Okay. So water. Worst thing for our properties. There's nothing worse. Okay. So when you are going to do your site inspections, what you want to do is focus on the exterior. You want to focus on a macro perspective, also on a micro perspective. I always like to do all 4 elevations when we are doing our quarterly inspections. You're going to start from the highest elevation. So you're observing the roof. Is there any missing shingles? You're going to look at your soffits. Is there any signs of discoloration on those soffits? Could be venting issues. You're going to look at the cladding. Of course, we're going to look at the topography. Okay. Bring a pen and paper as well to make those notes. Okay. Now, some highlights that I want to give you guys is the gutters. Okay. You want to make sure that a house kind of works in conjunction with all other systems components. So while we're talking about gutters, you got to factor in other components. Okay. Now, when you're looking at the gutters, we're looking for any signs of leakage at any of the joints. Is there staining? Are we having any areas where sagging? And frankly, when was the last time you've actually cleaned them or had someone clean them? We go and observe inspections or properties, and there is actually, trees growing out of, or vegetation out of the gutter system. Okay. So have a look at those components because you got to keep the water away. Now, another component in conjunction with the gutters would be the downspouts. Well, most of you have to ensure that the downspouts are discharging as practically as you can have away from the foundation or even the house. Okay. Now, one thing people don't consider is how high is the downspout discharging above the ground. I always tell clients, you want to be maintaining 12 inches. And the reason for this is number one, snow accumulation. And with that snow comes, clogging of the gutters. And then all that water just goes back up and freezes. You Vancouverites obviously don't have to worry about that condition, but in Edmonton, that's one thing that we want to be mindful about. Okay. Another thing you want to be considerate of is avoiding putting your gutters or downspouts across a walkway. Okay. Especially these newer houses where you got a front attached garage and you've got, the corner of the downspout coming across the front walkway. Well, what happens to that downspout? It just gets banged up and beat up by the tenant. Or worse, it remains in the upwards position, eroding the submaterial of the walkways and also affecting the foundations. Okay. Now, another thing to consider is it discharging onto the driveway? When you're discharging your downspout on a driveway, number one, you're increasing the liability for slippage and falls. Also, what are your tenants going to do when they have a little bit of snow and ice on the driveway? They're all going to resort to snow and ice melt. They're all going to run to Home Depot or get salt. Evidently, that's going to you're going to have premature spalling on the concrete, obviously wearing out the surface prematurely. Okay. So that's with your gutters. The next portion I want to talk to you guys about is your sump pumps. How do we test your sump pumps? You want to make sure that obviously it's discharging away from the house. We don't need to go over that again. But a lot of people, what they'll do is they will actually just lift the float inside the sump basin. Okay. You have to, or they'll just bypass the float by just plugging it in. Okay. You actually got to reach in the sump basin, lift it. Okay. You want to make sure that there's no sediment or sand inside of the basin. Naturally, that'll lead to premature wear of the impeller and the motor. A lot of times too is we'll find that the power supply isn't plugged in, or you just have one sump pump. Okay. So with all the historic rains we've been having, consider having a secondary sump pump installed. Okay. Now, it's oddly enough, we actually did a condo complex a couple of weeks back, and we actually posted a video on it, and we could actually time the sump pump that turned on. What was happening is the water was coming out of the sump pump discharge on the side of the house. The topography was going towards the window well. The water was going down the vertical drain, back into the sump basin and back out, and just recirculated. Could time it like clockwork. Every 3 minutes, that thing would turn on. And they're wondering why their sump pump was burnt out prematurely. Okay. So the next component that we're going to want to focus on is your bathrooms. Okay. So anytime we want to avoid any leaks, what we always encourage clients to do if you're going to do your own inspections is when you're testing your sink components, I would like to fill the sinks halfway full of water and have the stoppers in place. And then that's when I pull the plug. This does two things. It increases the pressure and the water volume going down that pipe, increasing the odds of you finding a leak. And then number two, when you're just running the water constantly, the pipe is actually designed to take that water volume. Thus, you're less likely to find an issue with that drain. Okay. Same thing could be said with the bathroom sinks. We like to fill the stoppers, release the stoppers, and this is when you're more likely to find plumbing leaks. Okay. So I got a colleague with me that does the inspections. He's the one that does the interior components, and there's a running joke amongst us is when we as inspectors inspect a toilet, what we do is we'll remove the toilet lid. We're looking for any corrosion inside the tank, any components that are starting to wear. But essentially what we like to do is we straddle the toilet and shake it back and forth with our legs. Well, my colleague Brendan, every day he wears shorts. And I'm sure if you've got someone that's learning to potty train or someone that misses the toilet, he's getting covered in pee periodically. So Brendan, I hope you're not listening to this webinar. But anyhow, so when you are inspecting the toilet, make sure that you're checking the base to see if there's any movement. A good thing you should be doing is actually caulking the front side of the toilet. It'll help actually secure the toilet in place so that it's less likely to rock back and forth from the substrate. Okay. Now, when you're inspecting the bathtubs, it's pretty self-explanatory. You want to make sure that the caulking is in place. Pay particular attention to where the tub meets the floor. A lot of times that caulking will start to fail. general rule of thumb is like every 5 years, the caulking should be replaced. Some caulking will last longer. Some other ones will last a year or two. Okay. So don't be afraid to spend money on a proper sealant. Okay. While you're inspecting the shower, just look for any wear and tear items. And then again, with the shower head, fill the tub up, and then you're going to be running that bathtub to put that pressure on the system. Okay. Shower head, same thing. You're inspecting that diverter. Where is the water, discharging inside the shower? Is there leaks? And then pay attention to the baseboards on the exterior components of the shower. A lot of times that gets, water damage, especially if your tenants have kids. What we like to do in our rentals is we actually like to put PVC baseboards in the bathroom, or if PVC doesn't meet your budget, you can actually use solid wood or finger primed MDF wood, which will sustain water a little bit better than your typical MDF. MDF with a little bit of moisture just swells, and it's, a couple of years and you got to replace it. So spend your money once and then you don't have to replace it again. Okay. Now, when you're done looking at the sink, the toilets, the bathroom, shower assembly, you want to make sure that you're effectively testing the fans or the HRV. Okay. What we do in the industry, it's the old tissue test. We'll actually take a piece of tissue, put it on the fan cover, and if the fan stays in place, that's extracting some of the moisture. Okay. Bath fans should be cleaned annually. This would entail removing the mortar and then ensuring that the diffuse or the damper inside actually opens and closes properly. Okay. If you're doing quarterly inspections, it's a good idea to actually clean the fan cover. Okay. Now, if you've got a newer house or if you've got a suite of property and you've got an HRV system, avoid putting a tissue on the diffuser on the wall. Just put your hand in place and see if you've got suction. Okay. The same could be done on the kitchen exhaust fans to make sure that they're opening and closing freely so that there's no obstructions. Okay. So that's with your moisture control systems. Now, there's a lot of components, but there's one gem that everyone always seems to forget about that they should review on their quarterly or annual inspections. And the first person to comment the right one, you get a free sewer scopes as long as you're in Edmonton market. So I'll give you guys a second to respond to that. And so what do you guys think that the thing that gets neglected most in a house? Ducts, that's a good one. Keep in mind, we're talking about water, right? Furnace. All right, furnace filter. Furnace filter's up there. What I actually had in mind is give another minute here. Back rub cock. So in actuality, it's a mainline back water valve. It's funny how often we go into a 20-year-old property and we are trying to observe it, and there's actually concrete on the bolts and the access cover, meaning that it's never been cleaned or serviced. And so this is the one component that's helping your home preventing a backup from occurring. And so if you're not familiar, Google back water valve. Essentially, it's a door that remains open depending on the style. And then if there's ever a backup, it will close, preventing a sewer backup from occurring. Okay. It's very easy to clean. It's pretty disgusting on occasion, but if you're gun ho, what you do is wear those gloves that go about elbow deep and then remove the cover, take a toilet brush and just clean off the inside. Generally, the gateway valve is yellow, and you just want to make sure it opens and closes freely. Okay. Now, one thing to be aware of, if you're starting to see toilet paper build up in there, it's probably a good telltale to get that sewer further assessed. Okay. The same could be said if you're looking around a floor drain. Is there any remnants of toilet paper? If you do, that means that you've had a backup, a small one nonetheless, but still it's something that you have to look at is the floor drain. Look to see if there's any sediment accumulation in there, okay? So that's with your mainline back water valves. A couple of other components that you guys want to focus on when you're doing your inspections. Number one, you want to check the smoke alarms. What's the age of the smoke alarms? They're relatively easy to test. You're just pressing the button. The batteries got to be, looked after. If you got battery operated systems, They last about 10 years or so. If they're starting to yellow, most manufacturers will actually have them so that after 10 years, they'll actually start to turn an ivory color and start to discolor naturally to kind of stick out like a sore thumb. Okay, that's usually the time for you to look into your smoke detectors. Okay, furnace filters. Obviously, that's one component that is neglected a lot of times. What we do, and my wife's actually come up with this strategy, and perhaps Dave, you can somehow implement this into your software, but we actually schedule all of our contacts for our tenants into our phones. There's a scheduled message that you can have, and then it automatically once a month will send the tenants a notification. Hey man, how's everything doing? Do you need anything? Is there anything that is out of ordinary that we need to address? Okay, it's all automated. You don't have to do anything. So Dave, perhaps you should look into that feature. Okay, this is what we do to ensure that all our properties have that quarterly inspection. Same thing with the furnace filters. We have that we've got some tenants that are more hands-on and we have faith in them to do the minor things, but we send that reminder and it's all through your phone. Everything can be systematic. As far as furnace filters, you're replacing them quarterly depending on the size of the filter. Your standard filter, you got a 1625 or 20 by 25, and we stockpile them. If we've got garages on site, whenever there's a massive sale on, we're going to Home Depot and purchasing them in bulk and then just leaving them on site. That way, if you do have a handyman going to do something, you just, hey, can you replace that for me so I don't have to go next month? Or if you're, this busy season in the summer where you got multiple properties to address, it can buy you some time. Okay. So furnace filters is an important concept. Okay. Another thing that a lot of landlords forego on their properties is a fire extinguishers. I actually think when I was at Adrian and Rebecca's place, they actually had a fire extinguisher in their back hallway. I don't know if it's still there or if I'm referencing the wrong property, but it's seldom that you see a smoke detector on a property. Okay. So consider having a an extinguisher installed at your properties just for the small peace of mind, right? Okay. So in a nutshell, there's hundreds of components that we could talk about what you should be looking at when it comes to maintenance. One other component that I think we should touch on is teaching your tenants where the main water shutoff is. This is so important because if you've got a 50-year-old house and the valve hasn't been turned on, or what I like to say is exercised in 10 years, the minute you need to shut it off in the event of emergency, it's not going to work. It's going to seize up or it's going to start leaking the minute you touch it. We actually had a client where that particular incident happened and they had water coming out of their main floor underneath their sink, no shutoffs. The water kept coming and coming and coming. And then they're just a flood. It could have been preventative by small maintenance. So when you go and do your quarterly inspections or annual inspections, shut that valve off, exercise it. Okay, it needs that. Every house needs maintenance. There's no such thing as a maintenance-free home. I know in the 90s and 2000s, it's like vinyl siding, maintenance-free. Well, there's no such thing. Okay, so make sure you're proactive with your inspections. Now, if you do have questions, if you're out looking at your property, send me a text and I can kind of give you some guidance. If you're out of province and you don't want to do your annual inspections or need a second set of eyes, feel free to reach out to us. It's something that we can, we're more than willing to help on. We've got a ton of experience, obviously, doing residential property inspections, but even the maintenance on our own properties. We do a lot of it in-house because we like to be hands-on with our properties. So does anyone have any questions?
I have one question. Is there a preferred time of year to do your inspections?
Well, it depends. If you're hands-on, like if you self-manage, do it quarterly, right? Because it gives you the chance to replace the fillings further. If you have a property manager, do it once a year. I like to do mine fall and summertime. Number one, fall, you're able to test your sump pump, and you're also able to clean the gutters at that time. And then in the springtime, there's no best time. It's at least get to it type thing. But
Okay.
It depends on what you're trying to focus on your inspection on. You know, if you've got water issues or what have you, right? Envelope issues.
We got a couple questions here from Luke Holland. What do you normally charge for an inspection, for an annual / quarterly inspection, or are they different services?
So yeah, they are. So it all depends on. We charge. It's starting at 400 is where we charge for your property inspection. This will include a report. You know, any areas of issues. What we do is, if you've got furnace filters on site, we'll just throw them in. If you've got them prepared, right? Because we're there. But when we're testing things beyond your general home inspection. Okay, like we're testing your humidifier. We're gonna look at all the components, right? Whereas the untrained eye will just look at, you know, what they know, right? And so this is what we do, right? And so obviously there's better value in having us do it on your behalf, and it's expensive.
Awesome. Do you have a checklist that you'd be willing to share with people, or is that part of the service offering? Actually,
I do. So I actually made one years ago, and it's since evolved, and it's come to the point where what we do is I can actually print off my software, and then it's got every itemized item known in a house. I can print that off and share it if people are looking for it. Just direct message us, and then I'll send you a copy of it.
Awesome. Okay. I had a question. The idea about having your tenants come along for an inspection, I would be afraid that if I brought a tenant along for an inspection and that, oops, there's a big surprise about something big that needs to be fixed, it's going to scare them off. They're going to be afraid. They're going to want to move out. What do you think?
It's more of, hey, like, nice to see you again. You're not having them walk around with you. It's more to educate them on like what you should be looking for, right? There's nothing. They don't need to be alongside, you know, being handheld, right?
Yeah, good point. They also probably don't want to do that. But no. I like the whole bonding thing. That's a really good idea. Awesome. How many pictures in a typical report?
We did an inspection today. First one I had 200. The second one had 203. So there's a lot of video. We can put videos if we need to like emphasize an issue. Let's say, you know, there's seepage coming from somewhere. We like to video it. That way, you know, it's transparent. You can understand it better. But, you know, we've got a lot of detail in the reports. Ultimately, if there's more footage, you're more likely to understand and then grasp what we're trying to relay, right?